You got somebody who can actually verify you live here? Somebody credible? Officer Derek Harding's eyes stayed locked on Carmen Belford as she sat on her own curb, grocery bags beside her. He stood over her, with his hand resting on his holster, just enough to plant fear. Carmen said nothing. She didn't have to. Her eyes dropped to her phone, her thumb hovering over a single contact. She pressed it to call. Harding leaned back with a smug grin on his face, completely sure he can handle whatever came next. He had absolutely no idea who was 11 miles away, already in his car, already coming. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The groceries were cutting into Carmen's fingers. She shifted both bags to one hand and dug through her purse for her keys. Her feet ached. Her back ached. She had worked 14 hours straight at St. Michael's Hospital, a double shift that started before sunrise and ended long after dark. All she wanted was to check on her kids, eat something warm, and sleep. The driveway of 4417 Magnolia Court had never looked so good. It was hers. 8 months of mortgage payments proved it. 8 months of overtime shifts and packed lunches and skipped dinners proved it. She had bought this house with her own hands, her own sacrifice, and she was proud of every single square foot of it. She found her keys. Then the spotlight hit her. It came from behind, white, blinding, washing over her like she was a criminal caught mid-run. She froze. The grocery bags swung at her sides. She turned slowly, deliberately, keeping her hands visible the way black women in America learn to keep their hands visible. A police cruiser sat at the end of her driveway. The driver's door opened. Out stepped Officer Derek Harding. He was a wide man, thick through the shoulders, with the kind of walk that said he believed every room, or driveway, belonged to him the moment he entered it. His younger partner, Kevin Slade, stayed in the passenger seat. "Ma'am?" Harding's voice was flat, bored almost. "Stop right there." Carmen stopped. "Is there a problem, officer?" "Got a report of a suspicious individual in the area." He looked her up and down slowly. "Description matches you." She was wearing hospital scrubs and carrying grocery bags. Her stethoscope was still around her neck. "This is my home," Carmen said. Her voice was steady. She had practiced steady. "I live here, 44117 Magnolia Court. Can you prove that?" She reached toward her purse for her keys. The keys with the little brass house charm Joseph had picked out for her at a school fair. Harding's hand dropped to his holster. Carmen's hand stopped moving. Not slowly, not gradually. It just stopped. Like her body made the decision before her brain did, some ancient survival instinct cutting the signal before she could think herself into a mistake. She didn't breathe. Harding didn't speak. The spotlight hummed behind him. Somewhere down the block, a sprinkler clicked on. Normal sounds from a world that had no idea what was happening in this driveway right now. Carmen's eyes moved from Harding's face to his hand, resting on the grip of his weapon with the casual ease of a man who had done this before, who knew exactly what that gesture communicated, who wanted her to feel it. She felt it. Her pulse was loud in her ears. Her fingers were still extended, still hovering near her purse, and she became suddenly, acutely aware of how that must look. Her dark hand, the night behind her, his hand on that holster. And she understood with absolute clarity that the distance between where she was standing and where everything went wrong was exactly as far as he decided it would be. His fingers curled slightly around the grip. Carmen's hand came down, slowly, all the way to her side. She spread her fingers open so he could see them. All five, nothing in them, nothing threatening, nothing at all. And she held them there like a quiet surrender to a situation she had done nothing to deserve. Her jaw ached. She hadn't realized she'd been clenching it. Don't react. Don't flinch. Don't give him a reason. The words moved through her like a prayer she'd memorized long ago. Harding's hand relaxed, just barely. Not enough to mean anything. Just enough to remind her that he was the one deciding. "I was reaching for my keys," she said quietly. "To show you the house key." Harding said nothing. He just watched her. Behind him, Slade's voice crackled through the radio. Carmen heard her own name read back through the static. Her plate number. Her address. 4417 Magnolia Court, Crestwood Hills. It matched. Of course it matched. Harding didn't move. "I'm going to need you to sit on the curb while I verify the property records." Carmen looked at him. She looked at the curb. She looked back at him. Then she sat down. She set her grocery bags beside her on the concrete like she was sitting at a park bench. Like this was normal. Like this was fine. Because showing Harding that it wasn't fine would cost her more than she could afford right now. She pressed her lips together and looked straight ahead. The neighborhood was quiet. Lights were off in most houses. A dog barked somewhere down the block. Normal sounds, safe sounds, except nothing about this was safe. And everyone on Magnolia Court knew it. They just didn't have to sit on a curb and feel it. Then the light in the front window came on. Carmen's stomach dropped. The door opened. Jasmine stood in the doorway, 14 years old, and already too familiar with fear. Her eyes found her mother on the curb. Her jaw tightened, the way Carmen's always tightened when she was fighting to stay in control. And then Joseph appeared behind his sister, 9 years old, sleepy-eyed, still in his dinosaur pajamas. He looked at the cruiser. He looked at the spotlight. He looked at his mother sitting on the ground in her nurse's scrubs with her groceries beside her. His face crumpled, and he started to cry. Joseph's crying cut right through her. Carmen sat on that curb and listened to her son fall apart in the doorway and forced herself not to move, not to stand up, not to reach for him. Because standing up right now, making any sudden movement toward that door, would give Harding exactly what he seemed to be looking for. So she stayed put, and it cost her everything. "Go back inside, baby," she called out. Her voice came out softer than she felt. "Everything's fine. Go back to bed." Joseph didn't move. He just stood there in his dinosaur pajamas, crying with his whole body the way 9-year-olds do, his small shoulders shaking under the porch light. Jasmine put her arm around him. Her face was stone. Harding glanced at them once. Then he pulled out his radio. He called for backup. Carmen's head turned sharply. "Backup?" The word came out before she could stop it. For what, exactly? Harding didn't answer her. 2 minutes later, headlights appeared at the end of Magnolia Court. Then, more. 2 additional cruisers rolled in slow and easy, like they had all the time in the world. They parked along the curb in front of her house, one behind the other, lights strobing blue and red across the front of her home. 3 patrol cars total now. 6 officers counting Harding and Slade. For a woman in scrubs sitting on her own driveway with grocery bags. Lights came on in the neighboring houses. Carmen could see the pale glow of curtains being pulled aside. Shapes standing in windows, watching. Linda Carver from 3 houses down stepped out onto her porch in her bathrobe, arms folded tight across her chest, eyes fixed on the cruisers. She didn't come closer. She didn't say a word. She just watched. Carmen looked at the faces of the officers moving toward her. Young ones, mostly. None of them meeting her eyes. She knew this feeling. It didn't require a history with Harding specifically. It was older than him. It lived in the particular way certain people looked at her when she walked into a room in this neighborhood. That half-second pause, that slight narrowing of the eyes, that silent question they never asked out loud, but never stopped asking either. "Are you sure you belong here?" She had felt it from neighbors who smiled too carefully. From the woman at the Homeowners Association meeting who asked 3 times which house Carmen had purchased, as if the answer kept failing to compute. She had felt it twice before on this very street. Once from a different officer who showed up unannounced on a Sunday afternoon, claiming a neighbor had called in a wellness check, and again from another responding to a noise complaint on a quiet Tuesday evening while she was reading to Joseph on the couch. Different officers, same message. And now Harding, who had never laid eyes on her before tonight, was delivering it again, fluently, without hesitation, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to summon 6 officers to verify whether a black woman in nurse's scrubs had the right to stand in her own driveway. She pulled out her phone. "What do you think you're doing?" Harding said. "Recording this interaction." She held the phone steady and kept her eyes on the screen. "Which is my legal right." Something shifted in his expression. Not anger exactly. Something colder than anger. He stepped toward her. "You're obstructing a law enforcement investigation." Carmen looked up at him, just once, direct and unflinching. "Touch my phone," she said quietly, "and I will consider that an unlawful seizure of evidence. I am a citizen of this country. I know my rights. And everything you have done in this driveway tonight is being recorded." The words landed. Harding stopped. A muscle in his jaw jumped. He held her gaze for a long moment, like he was measuring something, calculating whether she was serious or whether she would fold. She didn't fold. He stepped back, slowly, like it was his own idea. But the smirk that crossed his face as he turned away told her everything she needed to know. He wasn't done. This wasn't over. He had been doing this to people for a long time, and he had never once faced a real consequence for it, and he had no reason to believe tonight would be any different. Carmen kept the phone steady, and kept recording, and kept her face completely still. Inside her chest, something was shifting. The fear was still there. It never fully went away, but something else was moving beneath it. Something harder. Something that had been quietly building across 8 months of small humiliations and careful silences, and moments exactly like this one. She scrolled to a contact she hadn't used in a crisis before. The name sat there on the screen. Cedric. Her thumb hovered. Then she pressed the call. The phone rang twice. Then his voice came through, low and steady. The kind of voice that had been trained to stay level when everything around it was falling apart. Carmen. Just her name. But the way he said it, like he was already paying attention, already reading the situation through the silence before she spoke, made her exhale for the first time in 20 minutes. Cedric. She kept her voice down. Harding was 15 feet away. "I need you." A half-second pause. "Where are you?" "My driveway. There are 3 police cars in front of my house. They've had me sitting on the curb for—" She checked the time on her phone. "Almost half an hour. Are you safe right now?" She looked at Harding. He was watching her make the call with his arms crossed and that flat expression on his face. Slade was leaning against the cruiser, eyes down, not quite meeting anyone's gaze. "Not really," she said. Another pause, shorter this time. "I'm 40 minutes out. I'm coming." "Then come," she said. "Please." The call ended. She held the phone in her lap and breathed. What she didn't know What she had no way of knowing was that Cedric Belford was not in Fayetteville. He was not 4 states away in a barracks, or deployed somewhere she couldn't reach. He was 11 miles down the road at a Holiday Inn off Route 40, sitting on the edge of a hotel bed in the same gray hoodie he'd driven in that morning. He had come for Joseph's baseball game. Carmen had called him 2 days ago to say it was canceled, rained out, reschedule pending. What she hadn't known was that the game had been rescheduled for that Saturday, and Joseph's coach had sent the updated notice to the wrong email address. Cedric had found out from Joseph directly during one of their weekly calls, and he'd decided to drive up anyway and surprise them in the morning. He was in his car in 4 minutes. Back on Magnolia Court, the waiting settled in like something physical. Carmen sat on the curb with her phone in her hand and her groceries beside her, and she watched Harding the way you watch a dog you don't trust. Not with panic, but with the steady, quiet attention of someone who knows better than to look away. Harding was pacing now, slow, deliberate circles near the front of his cruiser. He knew the recording was live. She could see it in the way he was choosing his words more carefully, the way he had stopped talking directly to her and was instead murmuring to one of the additional officers with his back half turned. Whatever legal justification he had walked onto this driveway with, it was dissolving. He could feel it, and it was making him careful in a way he hadn't been at the beginning. Slade stayed by the passenger door. He hadn't said more than 10 words since this started. He kept looking at his shoes, at the cruiser, at the house across the street, anywhere except at Carmen on the curb. She noticed that. She filed it away. The other 4 officers stood in loose formation near their vehicles. 2 of them had exchanged a look about 5 minutes ago. A quick, sideways glance that said more than either of them would ever put in a report. They were young. One of them couldn't have been more than 25. He was staring at the ground with his hands in his pockets, like a man waiting for a bus that was already late. Nobody spoke. The sprinkler down the block had clicked off. The dog had stopped barking. The neighborhood had gone back to its quiet Saturday night rhythms and left Carmen Belford sitting on a curb in her nurse's scrubs as if this were a perfectly ordinary thing. She checked the time. 36 minutes since the call. 2 more to go. Then headlights swept the end of Magnolia Court. A black SUV turned onto the street. It moved slowly, deliberately, the way vehicles move when the person behind the wheel is taking in every detail. It rolled to a stop behind the last cruiser and sat there for just a moment with the engine running. Then the door opened. Cedric Belford stepped out. No uniform, no insignia, just the gray hoodie and the quiet, absolute certainty of a man who had walked into worse situations than this one and walked back out of every single one of them. He didn't look at Harding. He didn't look at the cruisers or the officers or the lights still strobing blue and red across the front of Carmen's house. He walked straight to her, past all of it, like it wasn't even there. He stopped in front of her and put one hand on her shoulder. "I'm here," he said. Harding saw Cedric coming and stepped forward. "Sir, this is a restricted area. I'm going to need you to step back behind the—" Cedric stopped walking. He turned and looked at Harding the way you look at something that requires your full attention before you decide what to do with it. "I'm Lieutenant Colonel Cedric Belford, United States Army Delta Force." His voice was calm, completely, unnervingly calm. "This woman is my sister. This is her home. And you are going to explain to me right now the legal basis for her detention." The air on Magnolia Court changed. It wasn't anything dramatic. No one flinched. No one gasped. It was quieter than that. A subtle, collective shift, like the moment before a storm when the wind suddenly stops and every living thing goes still. Slade went pale. Carmen watched the color drain out of his face in real time. One of the additional officers near the back cruiser took a single, slow step backward, as if he was hoping nobody would notice. Harding noticed. His jaw tightened. "Sir, we received a report of a suspicious individual in this neighborhood, and we are following standard procedure." "What procedure?" Cedric pulled out his own phone. He was recording now, too. "Cite the specific protocol that required 6 officers to respond to an unverified call and detain a homeowner on her own property for 45 minutes. Harding opened his mouth. "And before you answer," Cedric said, "I want to be clear. I am recording this interaction. Every word, every timestamp. So take your time and be precise." Harding closed his mouth. He tried again. Something about community safety protocols. Something about the responding officer's discretion in determining risk levels. Something about how the situation had been handled completely within departmental guidelines. Cedric let him finish. Then he asked one question. Was she advised of her right to leave at any point during this detention? Silence. Was she read any formal charge or suspicion specific enough to justify continued detainment after her identity and address were confirmed by your own radio dispatch? More silence. Did any officer on scene document the name and contact information of the individual who allegedly placed the suspicious person report? Harding's face was doing something complicated. The bored certainty he'd walked onto this driveway with was gone. What was underneath it was less comfortable to look at. Something reactive, something calculating, something that recognized it had underestimated the situation and was trying to find a way to reframe it. He tried once more. A comment about Cedric's tone, about interfering with an active investigation. Cedric didn't blink. There is no active investigation. There is no charge. There is no probable cause. There is a nurse who came home from a 14-hour shift and was forced to sit on her own curb in front of her children, while 6 officers stood in her driveway and provided not a single lawful justification for any of it. He let that sit for a moment. "So here is what is going to happen. You are going to clear your units from this property, and then I am going to take my sister inside her home." Nobody moved for about 3 seconds. Then Harding jerked his chin at the additional officers. "Clear out!" Doors opened. Engines started. One by one, the cruisers rolled away from the curb until only Harding's remained. He held Cedric's gaze for a moment, one last attempt at reclaiming something, and then he got in his car and pulled away without another word. Cedric watched until the taillights disappeared. Then he turned back to Carmen, and the world got quieter. He picked up her grocery bags from the curb. He walked her to the door. Joseph was through it before they even reached the porch steps. Launching himself at Cedric with both arms, burying his face against his uncle's chest, his small body still shaking with the leftover sobs of a 9-year-old who had been frightened and didn't fully understand why. Cedric held him with one arm and carried the groceries with the other and didn't say a word. Just held on. Jasmine stood inside the doorway. She was 14, and she was trying very hard to hold herself together. Her hands were trembling at her sides. Carmen got through the door. Cedric set the groceries down. The door closed behind them. And then, finally, privately, with only her family around her, Carmen let herself cry. Not from weakness, not from defeat, but from the sheer, exhausting weight of 45 minutes of terror she had held completely still inside her body and was only now allowed to put down. Outside, 3 houses down, Linda Carver stood on her porch a moment longer. Then she went back inside. The door clicked shut behind her. She didn't say a word. Cedric was already at the kitchen table when Carmen came downstairs. Coffee was made. His notepad was open. His phone was charging on the counter. He had his reading glasses on, the ones he always pretended he didn't need, and he was reviewing the timestamps on Carmen's recordings with the focused precision of a man building a case. Joseph was at the table eating cereal, watching his uncle work with wide, quiet eyes. Jasmine leaned in the doorway with her arms crossed, still carrying last night's tension in her shoulders like she hadn't quite let it go. Carmen poured herself a cup of coffee and sat down. "Walk me through everything," Cedric said. "From the beginning." She did. All of it. The spotlight, the holster, the curb, Harding's face when she refused to hand over her phone, the 6 officers on her driveway for 45 minutes, while Joseph cried in the doorway. Cedric listened without interrupting, writing steadily, asking precise questions at precise moments. He already had her recordings. He pulled the patrol log timestamps from a law enforcement database he had access to through his security clearance. He documented everything with the same methodical attention he brought to mission planning, because that was exactly what this was. By 9 in the morning, the formal complaint was ready. He filed it directly with the Crestwood Hills Police Department's Internal Affairs Division, with copies sent simultaneously to the city's Civilian Oversight Office and the Ohio Attorney General's Public Complaints Portal. Then he called Captain Alan Prescott. Carmen sat across the table and listened to one side of the conversation. Prescott picked up on the second ring. Cedric introduced himself, rank, full name, branch, and explained the purpose of the call in 3 sentences. Then he went quiet and listened. Carmen watched her brother's face. It gave away almost nothing, but she knew him well enough to read the small things. The slight tightening around his eyes. The single slow breath through his nose. Prescott was being smooth. When Cedric finally spoke again, his voice was measured and final. "I have time-stamped recordings, a patrol dispatch log, and 6 officers on record at the scene. I expect a written response within 5 business days. Thank you, Captain." He hung up. "What did he say?" Carmen asked. "Everything a man says when he's more concerned about the complaint than about what caused it." Cedric closed the notepad. "He'll address it." He said it with confidence. He believed it. The documentation was solid. The chain of evidence was clean, and a lieutenant colonel filing a formal complaint against a patrol officer was not something a department could quietly ignore. Not on paper, anyway. He left that afternoon. Joseph hung on to him at the door for a full minute, both arms locked around Cedric's waist. Cedric held on just as long. He hugged Jasmine, who let him briefly, then stepped back and looked at the floor. He hugged Carmen last and said quietly into her hair, "Let the process work." She nodded. She believed him. For 3 days, she let herself believe him. She went back to her shifts at St. Michael's. She made Joseph's lunches and helped Jasmine with her history project and paid her electric bill and watered the plant on the kitchen windowsill. She was a homeowner and a mother and a nurse, and she had done everything right and filed everything correctly, and the process was working. On the 4th morning, she walked to the mailbox in her robe before the coffee was ready. The dismissal letter was on top. 2 paragraphs. Official letterhead. The language was clean and bureaucratic, and completely bloodless. Officer Harding had acted within established protocols. The responding officers had exercised appropriate caution given the nature of the call. The complaint had been reviewed and found to lack sufficient grounds for disciplinary action. 2 paragraphs. Carmen read it twice. Then she folded it carefully and took it inside. Beneath it in the mailbox was a certified letter from the Crestwood Hills Municipal Code Enforcement Office. A noise and nuisance citation, backdated 12 days. A fine of $400. She set both letters on the kitchen table and stood there looking at them. That evening, while Jasmine was doing homework and Joseph was watching television, Carmen's phone rang. A number she recognized. Her supervisor at St. Michael's Hospital. Her supervisor's voice was careful, professional, apologetic in the way people sound when they're delivering news they didn't choose. A formal complaint had been filed with the Ohio State Nursing Board. The allegation that Carmen Belford had behaved erratically and aggressively toward law enforcement officers during a recent incident. The board had opened a preliminary inquiry. The hospital was required to notify her. Carmen sat down slowly at the kitchen table. The two letters were still in front of her. She looked at them for a long time. Let the process work. The process had just declared war. Carmen called Cedric the same night. She read him both letters out loud. The dismissal. The citation. Then she told him about the nursing board complaint. Her voice stayed even all the way through, flat and controlled. The same voice she used when she was delivering bad news to a patient's family and needed them to stay calm. When she finished, Cedric was quiet for a moment. "They're not just protecting Harding," he said. "They're coming after you." "I know." Another pause. Longer this time. She could hear him thinking. "I'm making a call," he said. "To who?" He didn't answer directly. "I'll be in touch tomorrow. Don't respond to anything in writing without running it by me first." The call ended. Carmen sat at the kitchen table until the house was completely still. Then she went to bed, stared at the ceiling for 2 hours, and got up at 5 to make Joseph's lunch before her shift. The next 2 weeks moved like a slow bleed. The nursing board complaint hit first and hardest. Carmen retained a licensed defense attorney, a careful, competent man named Nathan Corso, who came recommended and expensive. The retainer alone cost her $1,100. She paid it from the account she had been building for Jasmine's first year of college. Nathan filed the initial response to the board and told Carmen plainly the complaint would proceed to a preliminary hearing set 6 weeks out. If the board found sufficient grounds at that hearing, the case would advance to a full formal review. Suspension was a real possibility. If she was suspended, she couldn't work. If she couldn't work, she couldn't pay the mortgage. The math was ugly, and it only went one direction. She didn't tell Jasmine any of that. 3 days after retaining Nathan, the second code enforcement citation arrived. This one cited her trash bins, stored 2 inches outside the designated side yard boundary, according to a municipal ordinance she had never been informed of. The fine was $275. 4 days after that, a third citation arrived. A crack in her driveway, running 18 inches along the left edge near the garage, was classified as a public safety hazard. Another $380. Carmen drove slowly down Magnolia Court that evening after her shift. She looked at every driveway on the block, counted the cracks. There were 7 visible from the road alone, some of them twice the size of hers. She drove back to her house and sat in the car for a few minutes before going inside. None of her neighbors had received a citation. She would have heard about it. Then the neighborhood Facebook group. She saw it on a Thursday evening while Joseph was in the bath. An anonymous post, no profile photo, an account created 2 weeks prior, expressing concern about the recent police activity on Magnolia Court, and suggesting that the frequency of incidents raised questions about the street's overall character. There were 11 comments. Most of them were vague and careful. A few were not. Nobody named Carmen directly. Nobody had to. She put her phone face down on the counter and finished getting Joseph ready for bed. Later, standing in the hallway outside his room after he'd fallen asleep, she let herself feel it. The specific, grinding exhaustion of fighting something that kept changing shape. Every time she addressed one front, another opened. The complaint, the citations, the post, none of it was accidental. She could feel the design beneath it, even if she couldn't yet see the full picture. The following Wednesday evening, a car she didn't recognize parked in front of her house. A woman got out. Mid-50s, natural hair, sharp eyes behind rectangular glasses, a briefcase that looked like it had seen the inside of a lot of courtrooms. She walked up to Carmen's door and knocked with the particular confidence of someone who already knew they were going to be let in. Carmen opened the door. "Brenda Shelton," the woman said. "Cedric called me. I understand you need a lawyer." Carmen stepped aside and let her in. Brenda spent 90 minutes at the kitchen table. She read every letter. She watched both recordings twice. She reviewed the citation notices, the board complaint documentation, and the timeline Cedric had prepared. She asked 11 questions, all of them precise, none of them wasted. Then she looked up. "This is textbook," Brenda said. Her voice was quiet, but there was something burning underneath it. "They can't scare you out, so they're going to bleed you out. Financially, professionally, socially. This is a coordinated campaign, and it is absolutely actionable." She set her pen down on the table. "So here's what we're going to do about it." Cedric drove back to Columbus the next morning. He didn't call ahead. Carmen opened the front door and found him on the porch with a duffel bag and a coffee from the gas station down the road, and understood without asking that he had decided this required him to be present. She let him in without a word. Joseph came flying down the stairs 30 seconds later. Brenda arrived at 8:30. The three of them sat at the kitchen table while the kids were at school. Brenda opened her briefcase and laid out the legal framework in plain, direct language. She was filing a federal civil rights lawsuit, Belford v. City of Crestwood Hills, alleging racial discrimination in law enforcement, coordinated retaliation against a civilian complainant, and conspiracy to deprive Carmen Belford of her constitutional rights. The recordings, the patrol log, the timeline of citations following the complaint dismissal, all of it formed the foundation. "How long does something like this take?" Carmen asked. "Depends on how fast they want to settle," Brenda said. "And right now, they don't know what we have. That's our advantage. I want to keep it that way while we build the full picture." She closed the briefcase. "I'm assigning investigators to trace the original call, the one that brought Harding to your driveway that night. Anonymous calls don't come from nowhere. There's always a number, always a source." Cedric nodded slowly. "How soon?" "Give me 10 days. It took 7. Brenda called on a Thursday afternoon. Her voice had a different quality to it, still controlled, still professional, but with something underneath it that made Carmen sit down before she'd even heard the news. "The call came from a landline," Brenda said, "registered to a company called Crestwood Property Solutions, LLC. Carmen didn't recognize the name. "What is that?" "A property acquisition company. They've been operating in Crestwood Hills for about 4 years, buying residential properties and converting them to high-end rentals." A pause. "They have a documented interest in Magnolia Court specifically." Brenda came back to the house that evening. Cedric was already there. She spread the documents across the kitchen table. Incorporation records, property deeds, acquisition history, financial disclosures. The picture that emerged was methodical and cold. In the past 3 years, Crestwood Property Solutions had purchased 2 homes on Magnolia Court. Both sales had followed the same sequence: code enforcement citations, noise complaints, at least one documented police encounter at the property. Both previous owners were black. Both had sold within 18 months of moving in. Both had sold below the assessed market value of their homes at the time of sale. The company had acquired both properties within 60 days of each sale. Carmen looked at the addresses on the documents. She knew those houses. The Hendersons at 4401 had moved out 14 months ago. She had always assumed it was a job relocation. The family at 4409, she had never even learned their name before their moving truck appeared one morning. She looked up at Brenda. They ran them out. That's what the evidence suggests, Brenda said carefully. And they were working toward doing the same to you. Who owns the company? Cedric asked. He was reading the financial disclosure page. His voice was steady, but his eyes had gone sharp. Brenda reached across the table and pointed to a name halfway down the investor list. Cedric read it. He went very still. Robin Dalton, Brenda said, 40% silent investor. Robin Dalton is the brother-in-law of Captain Alan Prescott. The kitchen was quiet. Carmen looked at the name. She read it twice. She thought about Prescott's smooth voice on the phone, telling Cedric the complaint would be taken seriously. She thought about the 2-paragraph dismissal letter. She thought about the citations arriving like clockwork in the days that followed. The nursing board complaint filed by someone who knew exactly how to hurt her. The anonymous Facebook post that appeared like a lit match dropped on dry grass. None of it was careless. None of it was a rogue officer acting alone. This was an operation. It had a financial motive, institutional cover, and a paper trail that connected a police captain to a predatory scheme that had already displaced 2 families from this street and was designed to displace a third. Cedric set the investor document down on the table. He didn't speak for a long moment. The particular stillness that came over him wasn't shock. It was the specific, focused quiet of a man who had spent his entire career identifying threats and deciding how to eliminate them. He looked at Brenda. "Then we take all of it," he said. Brenda clicked her pen. "That's exactly what we're going to do." The lawsuit was filed on a Monday morning. By Thursday, Harding had filed a counter-complaint. Brenda called Carmen at work to tell her. Carmen stepped into the break room, closed the door, and listened with her eyes fixed on a water stain on the ceiling tile above the coffee machine. The counter-complaint alleged that Cedric Belford had intimidated and obstructed law enforcement officers during the incident on Magnolia Court. It claimed he had weaponized his military rank as a tool of coercion and created a hostile environment that prevented officers from performing their duties. It requested a formal investigation into Cedric's conduct and suggested his behavior warranted review by military oversight authorities. It was 4 pages long. Harding's account of that night bore almost no resemblance to what Carmen's recordings showed. "Can they do this?" Carmen asked. "They just did," Brenda said. "It's a pressure tactic. They want Cedric on defense. They want you distracted. And they want to muddy the water before this gets to a judge." A pause. "I've already filed our response. But Carmen, it's going to get louder before it gets quieter." It got louder the same evening. The 6 o'clock news ran the segment at the top of the second block. Carmen didn't know it was coming. She found out when a colleague texted her a link in the hospital parking lot as she was walking to her car. She sat in the driver's seat and watched it on her phone. The reporter was professional and pleasant, and the framing was a quiet disaster. The segment opened with footage of the Crestwood Hills Police Department building, clean brick, American flag, morning light. Then came a photograph of Harding in his dress uniform. Then a soundbite from a department spokesperson describing Harding as a dedicated 18-year veteran who felt his professionalism had been questioned unfairly. The words military intimidation appeared on the lower third graphic beneath Cedric's name. The segment spent 45 seconds on Carmen. It spent 2 minutes and 10 seconds on Harding. She drove home without the radio on. Jasmine was at the kitchen table doing homework when Carmen walked in. She looked up and read her mother's face the way teenagers read their parents, instantly and completely. What happened? Carmen set her bag down. She thought about saying nothing. She thought about the version of this conversation where she protected her daughter from one more thing. Then she looked at Jasmine's face. 14 years old and already carrying more awareness of this situation than any 14-year-old should have to, and decided she deserved the truth. She sat down and told her about the counter-complaint, about the news segment, about the way the story was being reshaped in public, gradually and deliberately, from a case about a black homeowner harassed in her own driveway into a story about a big, scary military man who made some officers uncomfortable. Jasmine listened to all of it without interrupting. When Carmen finished, Jasmine was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "They're going to make us the problem, aren't they, Mom?" It wasn't a question. It was a recognition. The particular, weary recognition of a 14-year-old girl who had grown up watching adults she trusted get treated like threats for existing in spaces that other people had decided didn't belong to them. Carmen didn't answer right away. She looked at her daughter, this sharp, clear-eyed girl who deserved a world that was better than the one currently sitting at their kitchen table. And she said, "They're going to try." Cedric called from Fayetteville at 9. He had seen the segment. His voice was measured and even and gave nothing away. "Stay steady," he said. "I know how this looks right now, but the ground is shifting under Harding's feet, even if he can't feel it yet. Trust the process we've built." "You keep saying that," Carmen said. "Trust the process." "Because the process is working. It's just not working visibly yet." A pause. "There are things in motion that I can't talk about right now. But Carmen, you are not alone in this." She wanted to ask what he meant. She didn't. She had learned a long time ago that when Cedric said he couldn't talk about something yet, pushing only cost time. The following morning, Carmen found a casserole dish on her porch. Ceramic, still warm, covered in foil with a handwritten note tucked underneath. "I'm sorry. I don't know what to do." No signature. But Carmen recognized the handwriting. Linda Carver, 3 houses down. She stood on her porch holding the casserole for a moment. Then she took it inside and fed it to her children for dinner, and said nothing about where it came from. Guilt wasn't courage, but it was something. It was a start. The personal day felt strange. Carmen sat across from Nathan Corso in his office on a Tuesday morning with no scrubs, no hospital badge, nowhere to be until she was ready to leave. She had not taken a day off from St. Michael's in 4 months. The stillness of it felt wrong, like the quiet before a storm rather than actual rest. Nathan walked her through the hearing preparation with the careful, methodical patience of a man who understood that his client was not just fighting for her license, but for everything that license made possible. Her income, her home, her children's stability. He needed her to understand exactly what the board would be looking for, exactly how the opposing attorney would frame his argument, and exactly how Carmen would need to present herself. Composed, credentialed, unimpeachable. "They're going to try to paint you as volatile," Nathan said. "The entire complaint rests on that one word, erratic. That's their foundation. So we dismantle the foundation." Carmen nodded and took notes, and kept her voice steady through 2 hours of preparation. She drove home through Crestwood Hills with the windows down. passed Magnolia Court, slowed slightly as she went by 4401 and 4409, the two houses Brenda's investigators had identified. Two families who had sat in driveways, received citations, quietly bled, and eventually left. She wondered if they had also sat in a lawyer's office somewhere, learning how to appear unimpeachable while everything they had worked for was being methodically dismantled around them. She wondered if anyone had filed a lawsuit for them. She pulled into her driveway and went inside and made lunch and told herself to keep going. 2 days later, the first piece of good news arrived. Brenda called at noon. Her voice had a new energy to it, controlled but barely. The judge granted the TRO. Carmen sat down. What does that mean exactly? It means every single code enforcement action against your property is frozen. The citations, the fines, all of it suspended pending the outcome of our civil suit. They cannot touch you with another citation while this case is active. And if they try, Brenda paused for effect, they will be in contempt of a federal court order. Carmen pressed her free hand flat against the kitchen counter. Breathed. That's not all, Brenda said. Check the Columbus Advocate website. Carmen pulled up the page on her phone. The headline ran across the top of the front page. 6 complaints, 0 consequences. Inside Officer Derek Harding's undisciplined career. The byline read, Monica Wardens. Carmen read the piece standing in her kitchen. It was long, deeply sourced, and methodical in a way that left no room for doubt. Monica had obtained Harding's full complaint history through a public records request. 6 prior complaints, all dismissed, never investigated beyond the internal review process that Prescott's office controlled. 3 complaints from black residents, 2 from Latino families, 1 from an elderly Vietnamese couple who had lived on the east side of Crestwood Hills for 11 years. The piece named Prescott. It named the property management company. It named the financial connection between Prescott's brother-in-law and the acquisition pattern on Magnolia Court. It named Carmen's case as the thread that had unraveled all of it. By 2 in the afternoon, the story had been picked up by the Columbus Dispatch. By 4, it was on 3 regional television stations. By 6, 2 national civil rights organizations had issued statements expressing concern and announcing they were monitoring the case. At 6:15, Brenda called again. Harding is on administrative leave, she said, effective immediately, pending an internal review. And Prescott just released a statement. What does it say? That the department is deeply committed to transparency, accountability, and the trust of every resident in Crestwood Hills. Brenda's voice was as dry as gravel. He used the word integrity twice. And you believe him? Not even a little. But it means they're running scared, Carmen. It means we've got them moving backward. The energy in Brenda's voice was something Carmen hadn't heard before. The particular, barely contained triumph of a woman who had spent decades fighting battles like this one and knew exactly what a turning tide felt like. They're running scared. For 48 hours, Magnolia Court felt like a different street. Carmen picked Joseph up from school, and he talked the whole way home about a kid in his class who could burp the alphabet. She sat at the table with Jasmine and helped her outline a history essay. She cooked a real dinner, not reheated, not rushed, and they ate it together at the kitchen table with the television off. She slept through the night for the first time in 3 weeks. Then her phone rang at 6 in the morning. She looked at the screen. Nathan Corso. She answered it, and the 48 hours ended. Nathan's voice was careful in the way that voices get when the news is bad, and the person delivering it is trying to manage the damage simultaneously. There's a story running this morning, he said. I need you to read it. before you go anywhere." Carmen was still in her robe. Joseph was asleep. The house was gray and quiet in the early morning light. She pulled up the website Nathan gave her and read the headline once. Then she read it again because the first time didn't feel real. Viral police harassment victim has documented history of workplace conflicts. The story ran 4 paragraphs. It didn't need more than that. Whoever wrote it understood that the damage wasn't in the details. It was in the framing. The piece referenced a disciplinary note from Carmen's personnel file at St. Michael's Hospital. A disagreement with a supervising physician 4 years ago, documented as insubordination. The note had been formally rescinded by Human Resources 6 weeks after it was filed, accompanied by a written apology from the physician who filed it. It was supposed to be sealed. Someone had opened it anyway, and handed it to people who knew exactly what to do with it. Carmen set her phone face down on the counter. She stood at the kitchen window and looked at the backyard. Joseph's baseball mitt was on the grass where he'd left it 2 days ago. She had been meaning to remind him to bring it in. Her phone buzzed. Brenda. She let it ring twice before she picked up. "I've seen it," Carmen said. Brenda's voice had lost the energy it carried 2 days ago. It was still steady. Brenda's voice was always steady, but there was a weight underneath it now. The weight of a lawyer recalculating in real time. "Carmen, I have to be straight with you. This changes the optics, not the facts. The facts haven't moved an inch, but the jury pool, the board, the court of public opinion. People are going to see this, and some of them are going to let it stick, regardless of the context." A pause. "It's manageable, but I won't pretend it doesn't make things harder. Who accessed the file? We don't know yet, but it was sealed. Whoever pulled it broke the law doing it, and I am already pursuing that angle aggressively." Brenda's voice hardened. "This is a criminal act, Carmen, and we are going to treat it like one." Carmen thanked her and hung up. She poured her coffee down the drain. She didn't want it anymore. Nathan called back an hour later with news that landed like a second punch following the first. The nursing board had reviewed the morning's media coverage, citing the evolving picture of Carmen's conduct history and the public interest nature of the case. The board had voted to expedite the hearing timeline. The full formal hearing, previously scheduled 6 weeks out, was now 11 days away. 11 days to prepare a defense that had just been handed a significant new obstacle by someone willing to commit a crime to manufacture one. Carmen sat with that number for a while. 11 days. She was still sitting with it when Cedric called that afternoon. She told him everything. The story, the sealed file, the expedited hearing. She kept her voice flat and factual the way she always did when she was telling him something that required him to stay calm on her behalf. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Carmen, I need to tell you something." His voice had a quality she didn't hear often. Not worry exactly, something more controlled than worry, but heading in the same direction. The Army had been formally contacted regarding Harding's counter-complaint. An inquiry had been opened. A preliminary review into whether Cedric had violated Department of Defense conduct standards by identifying his military rank during a civilian law enforcement encounter. It was procedural, he said. It was likely nothing. But if the inquiry advanced, his security clearance would be under review. His clearance was the foundation of his career. Everything he had built over 20 years of service sat on top of it. Carmen closed her eyes. "Cedric, don't," he said quietly. "Don't apologize. This is not your fault." The silence after that was the worst part. Not because anything was said in it, But because she could feel the weight of everything it contained, his career, her license, her mortgage, her children asleep upstairs, all of it was hanging in the space between two phones in two different cities. That night she sat at the kitchen table alone. The letters, the citations, the headline, all of it spread in front of her like a map of a war she hadn't started. She put her hands flat on the table she had refinished herself. Joseph handing her sandpaper. Jasmine reading aloud from a library book about woodworking because she thought it was funny. She thought about leaving. She thought about it seriously and honestly for the first and last time. Then she pressed her palms harder against the wood grain and stood up. She was not going anywhere. Cedric called the next morning at 7. Joseph was eating breakfast. Jasmine was moving through the kitchen in that half-awake preschool shuffle that meant she needed 10 more minutes and a glass of orange juice before she was ready to be a person. Carmen was standing at the counter in her scrubs, keys in hand, 10 minutes from leaving for her shift. "I need you to hear something," Cedric said. "All of it. Before this goes any further." She set her keys down. "I'm listening." He started at the beginning. The night Prescott's dismissal letter arrived, the 2-paragraph letter that ended with insufficient grounds for disciplinary action, Cedric had not simply accepted it and waited for Brenda's lawsuit to run its course. He had made a phone call that Carmen knew about but hadn't fully understood. The call wasn't to a lawyer, it wasn't to a journalist or a congressman or anyone whose name appeared in a newspaper. He had called Colonel Leonard Weston. Carmen knew the name. She had heard Cedric mention Weston over the years, the way soldiers mention the people they trust with their lives. Carefully and not often. Weston was 58 years old, from a small town outside Savannah, Georgia, and had served alongside Cedric for the better part of 2 decades. He was the kind of man who measured his words like a surgeon measures an incision. Nothing wasted, nothing imprecise. He had been in the room when decisions were made that most people never heard about. He had also been in 3 specific situations overseas where Cedric Belford had been the reason Leonard Weston came home. When Cedric called and told him what was happening to Carmen, Weston listened to the whole thing without speaking. Then he said 5 words. "Tell me what you need." What Cedric needed wasn't pressure. It wasn't intimidation. He wasn't asking Weston to make calls that bent rules or pulled rank in ways that could be used against Carmen later. He understood, better than most, that the wrong kind of help could become a weapon in the hands of people like Harding and Prescott. He had seen it happen. What he needed was a network of witnesses, people with standing, people whose presence and documentation would ensure that the truth had institutional weight behind it when it finally came forward. Weston had spent 30 years in the United States Army. In that time, he had served alongside, mentored, and been saved by men and women who had since moved into every corner of civilian life. Attorneys, city officials, veteran affairs administrators, journalists, law enforcement officers. A network built not on favors or leverage, but on the kind of loyalty that forms when people have been through real things together and come out the other side. Over the past 3 weeks, quietly and without announcement, a portion of that network had been gathering around Carmen Belford's situation like a slow tide. A veteran now working as a senior analyst in the Ohio Attorney General's office had flagged the illegal access of Carmen's sealed hospital personnel file the moment Weston made him aware of it. He had not needed to be asked twice. A formal criminal investigation had been opened. Digital forensics had been assigned to trace the breach through the hospital's records access system. Every login, every timestamp, every IP address that had touched Carmen's file in the past 6 months. The trail was already narrowing. Carmen stood at her kitchen counter and listened to all of it. She didn't speak until he was finished. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. "Because I needed it to be real before I told you it existed," Cedric said. "I didn't want to give you something to hold on to and then have it not be there." She understood that. It was the same reason she didn't tell her patients a treatment was working until she had seen it working. Hope was a resource. You didn't spend it before you had it to give. "Is it real?" she asked. "It's real," he said. "The AG's office has an active investigation. The forensics team has a timeline. And there are people in this city, good people, people who served and came home and still believe this country is worth holding accountable, who have been watching what's been done to you and are ready to say so out loud." The kitchen was quiet, except for Joseph scraping the last of his cereal. Carmen looked at her keys on the counter. "You were never alone in this," Cedric said. "You just couldn't see it yet." She picked up her keys. "I have to get to work," she said. "I know." "Cedric." She stopped at the door. "Thank you." He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quiet and certain, and entirely her brother. "That's what I'm here for." Brenda's phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon. She was in the middle of drafting a motion when her assistant knocked and said there was a woman in the lobby who didn't have an appointment, but had asked for Brenda by name. Said it was about the Belford case. Said she was a neighbor. Brenda told her assistant to send her in. Linda Carver was 67 years old, and she walked into Brenda's office like a woman who had made a decision that had cost her something to arrive at. She was dressed carefully, pressed slacks, a pale blue blouse, reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. She sat down in the chair across from Brenda's desk, set her purse in her lap, and folded her hands on top of it. "I should have come sooner," she said. "I know that." Brenda looked at her steadily. "Tell me why you're here now." Linda took a breath. Then she started talking. She had lived on Magnolia Court for 19 years. She knew the street the way you know a place you have watched change slowly over a long time. Who moved in, who moved out, what the changes meant even when nobody said so out loud. She had watched the Hendersons at 4401 receive citation after citation until the husband started coming home from work, looking like a man being slowly crushed under something he couldn't lift. She had watched them load a moving truck on a Saturday morning 14 months ago, and she had waved from her porch and told herself it was probably a job thing. She had told herself that because it was easier than the alternative. When Carmen moved in, Linda had brought over a plant and introduced herself and thought, privately, that this was a chance to do better than she had done before. But then the incident started, and the citations arrived, and the neighborhood Facebook post appeared. The one Linda recognized immediately as the language of people who wanted something gone without saying out loud what that something was. And Linda had stood on her porch in her bathrobe on the night of the main incident and watched and said nothing. She had sent a casserole. She was aware of how that measured up. "I'm not here to feel better about myself," Linda said to Brenda. Her voice was firm. "I'm here because what's being done to that woman is wrong, and I have information that might help, and I have been sitting on it for too long already." Brenda picked up her pen. "Go ahead." Linda's statement took 40 minutes to give in full. She had seen Officer Harding's cruiser on Magnolia Court on at least 9 occasions in the 2 months prior to the incident. Slow passes, sometimes twice in an evening, always slowing near Carmen's house. She had assumed it was a routine patrol. She had not connected it to anything deliberate until after Monica Warden's article ran, and she had read every word of it twice. But the piece of information that made Brenda set her pen down and look up was the last one. On the night of the incident, Before Carmen had even turned onto Magnolia Court, Harding had pulled his cruiser up to Linda's driveway. He had rolled his window down and asked her, in a casual, neighborly tone, whether she had been the one to call in the report about a suspicious individual. When Linda said no, Harding nodded and driven away. He had not written anything down. He had not noted the interaction in any log. He had simply moved on, to Carmen's driveway, to the spotlight, to 6 officers on the curb. Linda had never been contacted by the Internal Affairs Review. No one had knocked on her door. No one had asked for her account of anything. Brenda stared at her notes for a moment. If Harding had been actively canvassing neighbors to find someone who would confirm the call before Carmen arrived home, and had documented none of it, that wasn't carelessness. That was deliberate. It was an officer constructing the appearance of legitimacy without the substance of it. And the fact that the Internal Review had never sought out the nearest neighbor as a witness suggested that Prescott's office had not been looking for contradicting accounts. They had been looking for confirmation, and when they couldn't find it, they had simply left the gap unfilled. Brenda filed an emergency motion before 5 o'clock that afternoon, citing material witness suppression in the original Internal Review process and demanding the inquiry be reopened under independent civilian oversight. She called Carmen that evening. "Linda came through," she said. "The AG has a name from the forensics team, and we walk into that board hearing tomorrow with everything we need." A pause on Carmen's end. Then, quietly, "It's really happening, isn't it?" "It's really happening," Brenda said. The article went live at 6:30 in the morning. Carmen was already awake. She had barely slept. The nursing board hearing was tomorrow, and her mind had spent the night cycling through every possible version of how it could go. She was on her second cup of coffee when her phone buzzed with a text from Brenda, containing a single line and a link. "Read this before you do anything else today." Carmen opened it. The headline ran across the top of the Columbus Advocate's homepage in the largest font the site used for its most significant stories. How Crestwood Hills Lost 3 Black Families. The Property Scheme Behind the Badge. Byline: Monica Wardens. Carmen read it, standing at the kitchen counter in the gray morning quiet before her children woke up. She read it slowly and completely, the way you read something that is simultaneously about you and so much larger than you that both things feel true at the same time. Monica had spent 3 weeks building the piece. Her source inside the municipal tax office had provided acquisition records, deed transfer dates, and assessment histories for every property Crestwood Property Solutions LLC had purchased in Crestwood Hills over the past 4 years. Cross-referenced against code enforcement logs, police dispatch records, and complaint histories, the pattern was undeniable and documented in precise, irrefutable detail. 3 families, 3 identical sequences, code enforcement citations within weeks of move-in, police encounters, at least 1 per household, sometimes more, noise complaints filed by neighbors who, when traced, had no documented history of filing complaints about any other property. Sustained pressure over 12 to 18 months. Below-market sales. Company acquisition within 60 days of closing. All 3 families were black. The piece named Crestwood Property Solutions. It named Robin Dalton. It named Captain Alan Prescott, and detailed the financial relationship between Prescott and his brother-in-law with the precision of a legal brief. It cited the federal civil rights lawsuit filed by Brenda Shelton and quoted at length from the publicly available complaint documents. It referenced the active criminal investigation at the Ohio Attorney General's office into the illegal access of Carmen's sealed personnel file. And it named Carmen Belford, not as a victim, as the woman whose refusal to leave had pulled the thread that unraveled the entire operation. By 7:30, the story had been shared 4,000 times. By 9, it had been picked up by the Columbus Dispatch, 2 Cleveland television stations, and a national civil rights news platform with 500,000 subscribers. By noon, 3 separate civil rights organizations had issued statements. By 2 in the afternoon, the mayor of Crestwood Hills had requested an emergency closed-door meeting with Captain Prescott. Carmen heard about the mayor's meeting from Brenda, who heard about it from a contact inside City Hall, who described Prescott's expression walking into that office as the face of a man who finally understood the size of the thing coming toward him. Carmen was sitting at the kitchen table with Jasmine when she read Monica's piece a second time. Jasmine had come home from school, dropped her bag at the door, and sat down without being asked. She had seen it shared by 3 people on her school's social media pages before the final bell. They read it together in silence. When Jasmine finished, she didn't say anything for a moment. She sat with it the way she sat with things that were too large and too important to respond to quickly. Then she looked at her mother. "They can't make it go away anymore, can they?" she said. It wasn't a question. "No," Carmen said. "They really can't." What neither of them said, what didn't need to be said, was what that meant for tomorrow. The board hearing that had been hanging over their household for weeks. The expedited timeline, the sealed file weaponized in a headline. All of it existed inside a context that had now shifted fundamentally. The board members would have read Monica's piece. The opposing attorney would have read it. The entire institutional landscape of the hearing had changed overnight. 14 miles across the city, Kevin Slade sat in his living room and watched the coverage cycle through 3 different news channels. His phone had been ringing all day. He hadn't answered most of the calls. He answered one, his personal attorney, a man he had retained 2 days after the advocate's first story ran. His attorney told him the same thing he had been telling him for a week. "The best thing you can do right now is get ahead of this." Slade stared at the television. Prescott's name was on the lower third graphic again. He picked up the phone. Carmen was up at 5. She didn't need an alarm. Her body had decided sleep was finished at 4:47, and there was no negotiating with it. She showered, dressed, and stood in front of the bathroom mirror in her best suit. Charcoal gray, the one she had bought for her mother's funeral 6 years ago and had worn exactly twice since. It still fit. She looked at herself for a long moment. Then she went downstairs and made coffee, and sat with it in the quiet kitchen until it was time to go. Cedric had driven in the night before. He was sleeping on the couch when she came downstairs, and he was already awake when she reached the bottom of the stairs, sitting up in the dark in that alert, immediate way of someone whose body never fully surrendered to sleep. He looked at her. She looked at him. "Ready?" he said. "No," she said. "Let's go." Brenda met them in the parking lot of the Ohio State Nursing Board building at 8:45. She was in a deep burgundy suit, briefcase in hand, and she moved with the kind of focused energy that made the space around her feel organized just by her presence. She looked at Carmen once, top to bottom, and nodded. "You look exactly right," Brenda said. "Let's go take this apart." The hearing room was more formal than Carmen had expected. A long table at the front, where 7 board members sat in a row. A small table for Carmen and Nathan on the left. A matching table for the opposing attorney on the right. A public gallery along the back wall with 12 chairs. Every chair was filled. Monica Warden's was in the second row with a notepad open on her knee. 2 of Cedric's veteran contacts, men Carmen didn't know by name but recognized by the way they carried themselves, sat near the aisle. Linda Carver was in the third chair from the left, hands folded, back straight, wearing the pale blue blouse she had worn to Brenda's office. Carmen saw her. Linda met her eyes and gave one small, deliberate nod. Carmen nodded back. The opposing attorney was a man named Gerald Foss. He was polished and silver-haired, and had the practiced ease of someone who had argued in front of institutional bodies for 30 years and had rarely been surprised. He opened his case with the confidence of a man who believed the outcome was already decided. He presented the complaint in careful, measured language. He referenced the incident on Magnolia Court, using framing that emphasized confusion and escalating tension rather than harassment. He cited the disciplinary note from Carmen's personnel file, the sealed one, the rescinded one, and presented it as evidence of a pattern of behavior. He played 38 seconds of a television news segment. He used the word erratic 4 times in 6 minutes. Then Brenda stood up. She took the sealed file apart first. She presented the full HR documentation, the formal rescission letter, the written apology from the physician who filed the original note, the signed acknowledgement from St. Michael's administration that the note had been removed from Carmen's active record and sealed under hospital policy. She then presented the criminal referral from the Ohio Attorney General's office confirming that the file had been accessed illegally and that an active investigation was underway into who had provided it to the media. She looked at the board as she said that last part. She let it settle. Then she presented Carmen's record. 14 years at St. Michael's. Not a single sustained complaint. 3 commendations from department leadership. A letter from a patient's family, a grandmother whose son Carmen had stayed with through a long, difficult night, that was so simply and honestly written that one of the board members looked down at the table when it was read aloud. The full unedited footage from the night of the incident came next. All 45 minutes. The board watched it in silence. Gerald Foss watched it too. He wrote something on his notepad and underlined it twice, but didn't look up. Brenda's final witness appeared on a laptop screen at the front of the room. The chief of emergency nursing at St. Michael's, Dr. Pamela Mercer, 61 years old and 30 years in the department. She testified in a clear, unhurried voice that Carmen Belford was among the finest nurses she had worked with in her career. She called the complaint against Carmen's license the most transparently retaliatory document she had ever been asked to review. She used the word retaliatory deliberately. She did not walk it back. The board deliberated for 40 minutes. They came back at 2:17 in the afternoon. The chair read the finding in a flat, official voice. Complaint dismissed in its entirety. No action against Carmen Belford's nursing license. The matter referred to the Attorney General's office for investigation into the filing of a knowingly false professional complaint against a licensed medical professional. The room exhaled. Brenda put her hand over Carmen's. Carmen looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then she looked at the gallery, at Linda, at Monica, at the 2 men she didn't know who had shown up anyway, and she let herself cry. Not from relief, not from exhaustion, from the specific, overwhelming feeling of being seen. The 10 days that followed moved like a tide going out. Each wave pulled something away, something that Harding and Prescott and the machinery behind them had built carefully over years, and left the ground cleaner than it had been before. Brenda called with each update. Carmen listened, thanked her, and went back to her life. She was done putting everything on hold. Harding was terminated on a Wednesday. The independent civilian oversight panel, appointed after Linda Carver's witness suppression filing forced the original internal review to be scrapped entirely, completed its work in 8 days. Their findings cited 7 documented policy violations, coordinated retaliation against a civilian complainant, and a counter-complaint against Cedric Belford that the panel described in writing as knowingly false and retaliatory in nature. The counter-complaint was formally withdrawn. Harding was escorted out of the Crestwood Hills Police Department building at 2 in the afternoon without his badge, without ceremony, and without the quiet institutional protection that had followed him for 18 years. He was also named as an individual defendant in Belford v. City of Crestwood Hills. 3 days later, Prescott resigned. His statement cited personal reasons. It was 4 sentences long. The mayor accepted his resignation in a separate statement that used the word accountability 7 times in 2 paragraphs. Prescott's brother-in-law's company, Crestwood Property Solutions, LLC, was served with a federal subpoena the same afternoon. Robin Dalton's attorney released a statement. Brenda read it, set it aside, and kept working. Kevin Slade's call to his attorney produced the thing nobody had expected. He came forward voluntarily. His written statement was full and unambiguous. He confirmed that the initial stop of Carmen Belford had not been based on any genuine suspicious person report, that Harding had been running a pattern on Magnolia Court for months, targeting the property at 4417 specifically. He confirmed that Prescott's office had instructed him to sign off on the complaint dismissal without conducting any independent witness interviews. He confirmed that he had been present for conversations he should have reported and hadn't. His cooperation earned him reduced exposure in the civil suit. His statement was the last piece of a structure that had been standing on protected ground for a long time. It wasn't standing anymore. The Army inquiry into Cedric was closed with a 1-paragraph finding. No violation of Department of Defense conduct standards. The counter-complaint had been withdrawn. His record was clean. A formal written apology from the Crestwood Hills Police Department was delivered to Colonel Weston's office. Weston called Cedric when it arrived. Cedric said 2 words and hung up. The civil suit settled 12 days after the hearing. Carmen was not required to disclose the amount. She didn't. What she did tell Brenda when they sat across from each other at the kitchen table for the last time as attorney and client was that the number meant Jasmine's college was fully funded, Joseph's college was started, and the mortgage on 44-117 Magnolia Court was paid off in its entirety. The city issued a public apology. It ran in the Columbus Advocate and 3 regional papers. Monica Wardens covered it. The federal consent decree placed the Crestwood Hills Police Department under civilian oversight, mandated independent review of all complaints filed in the prior decade, and required comprehensive bias training department-wide. 3 families, the ones who had been pushed off Magnolia Court before Carmen arrived, were formally identified as victims in the federal fair housing investigation. Their stories were finally being told in a federal courtroom rather than absorbed quietly into the silence of a street that had let them go without asking questions. On a Saturday morning, 3 weeks after the settlement, Joseph rode his bicycle in the driveway. He was working on turning without slowing down, which Cedric had told him required leaning into the curve rather than away from it. Joseph kept leaning away. Cedric stood at the end of the driveway with his arms crossed and his patient face on, calling out the same correction every 3rd pass. Jasmine was on the porch with her earbuds in, pretending to be absorbed in her phone. She was smiling at Joseph's attempts in spite of herself. She would deny it if asked. Carmen was standing in the front doorway with a cup of coffee when she saw Linda Carver coming down the sidewalk. She was walking slowly and holding something in both hands, a potted hydrangea, purple, wrapped in green foil at the base. She stopped at the end of the driveway. Carmen walked down to meet her. They stood there for a moment. Linda looked at the plant and then at Carmen. and her expression carried everything that the casserole and the note had been trying to say, and hadn't quite managed. "I should have done more," Linda said. "You did," Carmen said. "In the end." Linda handed her the hydrangea. Carmen took it. They stood together in the morning light for another moment. Two neighbors on a Saturday. Nothing more complicated than that. Nothing less significant either. Carmen carried the hydrangea up the porch steps and set it beside the front door. She looked at her house. The mortgage paid. The driveway was repaired at the city's expense. The window where Joseph had stood crying in his dinosaur pajamas now filled with clean morning light. She picked up her coffee. Listened to Joseph and Cedric argue cheerfully about bicycle physics. She thought about what it had cost to stay. She thought about what it would have cost to leave. There was no comparison. There never had been. She was home. She had always been home. And now, at last, the whole world knows it. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel, and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked two special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.